It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogside Network, the show where we look at the dollars and the cents of the sports media industrial business complex. Steve, how are you doing on this spring morning?
I'm doing okay. I'm here, which is a good thing. But it's a fine day in Texas, and there's lots of stuff going on in the world right now. Certainly, both good and bad, which well beyond the scope of what we're doing here, of course. But in the sports world, it's a pretty exciting time too. I understand you went to the Grammys, though, Chris.
I did go to the Grammys, which, if anybody knows me, is not something people would put together. I've hated the Grammys since I was outraged that Quiet Riot wasn't nominated in 1984 or 5 or something.
I was outraged. For me, it was when Jethro Tull won Best Hard Rock, hard rock band.
That is one of the classic anti-Grammy facts of all time.
That was the day that I was done with the Grammys, and I haven't watched them since.
So, but my wife is a publicist, and so it's her job to pay attention to that. And the Grammys, actually, I'll tip my hat over the last couple of years, have just turned into a good TV concert. So, like, if you just like pop music on TV, the Grammys are a big night. So, so we went, and it was in Las Vegas. So that was pretty wild. I'd been to Las Vegas one other time. Have you been to Las Vegas, Steve?
Yeah. I'm not a big gambler, so it's for me. It's a bit. I'm there a day and I'm done. It's a bit much for me.
I am a gambler, and I still don't think I disagree with you.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the thing about it. If I could play a $5 blackjack table, I could keep that going for a few hours. It would be fun. But you can't do that in Vegas anymore. Even so, if you don't know this, it's like in the daytime, it'll be down to about a $15 or $20 table, but at nighttime, it goes up to like a minimum of $50 a hand.
Yeah,
I'm just not willing to play that,
I 100% agree, and it's why I've decided that as an East Coast guy, and I like plenty of West Coast things, but I am an East Coast guy at location and heart, and that's why Atlantic City is better, because you can find a $5 table even at night. There's got to be a place for the low rollers.
Yeah, because I don't really care about the money, and I do enjoy playing cards, but I'm just not willing to risk my mortgage, on Las Vegas, so I just don't.
So, and low rent Atlantic City, you can definitely find $5 tables.
Yeah, and we're talking about the Strip. I mean, if you go away from the Strip somewhere, there's probably at some gas station there's a video poker machine you could do, but this is like in and around the Strip and all those hotels. It's just impossible. I don't know how you guys do it, to be honest.
Yeah. The funny thing is, so I'll save my good sports story for when we get to a relevant topic. But the funny thing was, it's not ever been in Las Vegas before. Usually it's in LA, sometimes New York. It was moved there because of COVID, blah, blah, blah. It's supposed to be in LA this year, originally, in January. So it's in Las Vegas, so that means it's inside this giant MGM Grand, because they have the space to do it, and auditoriums, yada yada. So now the celebrities still go through a red carpet, but all the other schlubs like me and my daughter, have to go through the casino. But we're all dressed to the nines. I mean, not really us, but we're spoofed up. But most people are like really dressed up, right? And so here is this parade of people coming in and out, and all these yahoos in the casino. They know the Grammys are there because there's signs everywhere, so they're lined up to take pictures and catch celebrities. I felt like I was on a parade.
Through the door you went through.
No, there's no. I said to a woman who, I'm like, we are nobodies. What are you doing? Like, no, Beyonce is
not going to walk through the
Lady
casino.
Gaga's not walking down here. Even your sea levels aren't walking down here. So it was the funniest thing. I said to my daughter, I'm like, you've been photographed. She's in this poofy little dress. She looks like a little, preteen. I'm like, there are people taking pictures of you right now thinking you're somebody. They'll figure it out later. They don't know, but they're
thinking you're the daughter of somebody. The guitarist for, AC/DC or something.
Yeah, it was very odd. I felt like I was like on some weird parade through the casino.
Well, I'm glad you had that experience. Certainly sounds like fun.
It was. But let's get to the business of the business that we are covering. And Steve, we're gonna start out with really Dents to the Shield. I've nicknamed it because they kind of are coming fast and furious, right? The Shield's holding, but it is not a clean Shield at this point. We have sort of 3 stories that are bouncing around, more than that, really. But this week, they started to bubble. We'll start with our boy Snyder, who's gotten himself. I don't know what's happening, but basically the beats don't stop with our owner here of the Commanders.
Yeah, so a mid-level, best I can tell, manager in the ticket sales department apparently testified in front of a closed-door congressional session and accused the team of cooking the books in order to not report all of the ticket income to the NFL, because if you don't know, 40% of the ticket revenue goes to the opposing team and it goes to the NFL, and they kind of divvy it out. And so this guy alleged that Washington has 2 sets of books. One of them is the real set. The other is the set that goes to the NFL, which are, for Washington's like $25 in ticket revenue, that they have because nobody goes to the games. He's alleging that Washington cooked the books to keep it lower. Now, I have not seen any evidence of this. The report came, I forget who the credit to, I can't remember, but somebody in the mainstream media reported this. AJ Perez, maybe, Washington Post. Yeah, that's who the credit goes to. But what he didn't have, and it's no slam on him, but what he didn't have was any evidence. They claim the guy had evidence, but nobody's seen it. This is the kind of thing that to be perfectly honest, I'm a bit skeptical of. Just because if you haven't seen any evidence, this guy who's reporting, I don't know why he would necessarily have reports that the NFL sent to, or the Redskins sent to the NFL necessarily. And so I would be under no illusions that Snyder would be capable of doing something like this, but I'm just a bit leery of things like this without having seen evidence of it. And the team, for their part, vehemently denied this whole thing and said that anybody who said this has committed perjury, so they've vehemently denied everything. So, yeah, I'm a bit skeptical. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I would agree. It was AJ Perez for Front Office Sports, who kicked this off. I mean, there are a few things in my life where I apply pure Machiavellism to then the ouster of Snyder. I will put all values, morals, and whatever worldviews to the side if it takes out Snyder. So. And I don't think this. I think this. And what I worry here is that too many false shots hurt the overall goal here. And this feels like, this feels easily batted away. This feels premature. And at some point, he starts to actually gain some armor from all of this. I think that's the danger.
Yeah. Although, personally, I think the NFL ownership, not the public face, the real movers and shakers in the NFL would care far more about financial fraud than they ever would about anybody who felt up a cheerleader.
Oh, 100% I agree with that. I just think, but they also don't want,
It's a series of body blows as opposed to Mike Tyson to the chin.
Yeah.
And not even body blows, it's a series of light jabs is what it is.
You have to kind of accept that the NFL is somehow deficient here in how it keeps its own records and accounting. And just knowing about what a monster the NFL is at knowing how to make money and how they hire the large assumption is they hire good people to do these kinds of things. That's a lot of accounting and oversight and, hey, where's my money mob style, pay the capo type stuff that the NFL knows how to do. So it's a pretty high bar to think that this would get through those gates.
Yeah, it's a high bar to think Dan Snyder is smart enough to fool a massive accounting setup that's gone on for decades.
Yeah.
Of course, is he dumb enough to do it?
That's a low bar.
Yeah, right. I mean, is he dumb enough to think he could? Probably. But I guess you're saying the same thing I'm doing, just saying just a tiny bit different, which is, yeah, it sounds awful, but I don't know. I'm just kind of not buying it, unless we see if somebody produces the records, sure. And here's the thing, though. Let's pretend, for the sake of the hypothetical, that all of this is true and they did do this. Is it enough for the NFL to go to Snyder and go, "You're out. You got to go leave, buddy. We're tired of you."
Yeah, I think that 100%. And that's why, I mean, I think if you believe that strongly, it puts the burden of proof even higher, right? Like it actually ups that ante, not lowers it. So, and now one thing AJ Perez said, I think it was on some podcast, it might have been Kevin Sheehan, I can't remember, but he did say that he had another story and that there was evidence. And he said repeatedly, when asked follow-ups on that he was not at liberty to say because the front office sports lawyers had not vetted his story enough that front office sports is confident in running it. So but that was a pretty bold way of saying, I've got another story that I'm just waiting for clearance to publish.
Well, what that means is they need other sources to confirm the story in journalistic parlance. Yeah, look, I mean, Dan Snyder's a scumbag. We know this. This isn't news. It's just a matter of proof. And, in terms of the sexual harassment stuff, I guess two things. One, what I understand, and I think what, Chris, you understand, but I don't know if everybody listening understands, is that this is not a public Roger Goodell thing. He doesn't have any real power when it comes to ownership. If the owners want somebody gone, and we're not talking about a vote and procedures and all of that, what it really takes is for the influential owners, the Bob Krafts, Jerry Jones, Rooney families of the world, to decide. And then, like you said, like Mafia Capo style, get gone or we're going to get you gone. That's how ownership really changes in the NFL. And so that's that. But in terms of the sexual harassment stuff, I think I would venture to guess, just knowing the NFL culture like I know it, which I have been in the building a little bit, I think that all 32 teams have had this go on to some extent or another. Obviously, there's better owners than others, but the idea to think that a bunch of meatheads who've been around the NFL their whole lives aren't going to play grab ass with a few female employees, it's a bit naive. So what I think they don't want, they meaning the owners, is for that story to get bigger, because then there's going to be all kinds of allegations for all kinds of teams. And so I do think they think the finances are much more important for that reason.
So, okay, so you gave me a great segue there, Steve, because if we talk about dents in the shield, Snyder has his own he's got an autographed dent in that shield, right? Like, it's just like, oh, that's Dan's spot. Like, hopefully eventually it goes through, but right now it's just, there's the Dan Snyder dent in the upper left. But to your point, what you're just speaking on about the sprawl, here's where the sprawl did happen recently, where you had 6 attorney generals start to basically just say, hey, we're looking, we're interested, what's going on inside, with harassment, sexual assault, whatever, what's the culture. And this isn't, now I'd say that the commanders are the primordial soup for all of this stuff, which is what might tip the owners to, we've had enough. But now you have 6 AGs, and yes, anytime you're in a political realm, you can attribute all kinds of stuff to that. That sort of doesn't matter in a way, because it's happening. And you have attention, which is the thing you don't want. But now there's there's a whole pipeline of allegations and people looking for inquiries, et cetera, at the end, pointed right at the NFL, not at one of its teams. And so has that portal opened bigger now to see more of this, which does become a much larger threat to the NFL? Because to your point, if you go looking, you're going to find it.
Oh, absolutely. And listen, I mean, I've been a vehement critic of the congressional investigation, because I don't think that from a federal law standpoint, Congress should be spending a ton of time and money in committee time investigating the goings-on of a non-publicly traded, closely held private company. I don't think that's Congress's business. But to your point, it is what it is. And this attorney general thing, Slightly more rationale to have state attorneys general look into it for sure. But regardless of my feelings, that's what's happening. And it's sometimes this kind of thing is just like a big boulder rolling downhill like Indiana Jones style, and you just can't stop it. I'm going back. I think that was Temple of Doom. When he's running from a boulder, that's sometimes how these things happen. Regardless of whether I think they should be doing it, they are doing it. And these attorneys general, yeah, sure, they're probably just trying to capitalize on it and score some political points or whatever. But the point, as Chris said, is they are doing it. And especially the New York Attorney General, because that's, the NFL headquarters is there. If she has jurisdiction, do I think she's a sleazeball? Absolutely, but it doesn't matter. And the NFL is probably more scared of that, I would think, than anything, because now you've got state law violations, who knows what. It's like, if I'm an owner in the NFL, if I'm Jerry Jones, what's the out? What's the out? Is the out to just oust Dan Snyder, go to him and say, we're going to cap your knees if you don't leave? And will that solve the problem? It might, but it has to have maximum impact. How does it have maximum impact? We have to wait for a really horrible allegation. That's, I think, because if you oust him over something small, then that doesn't necessarily clear the decks.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do think you hit on the important part, though, which is that at what point do they have to cut the leg off to heal the body, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's, now when I that decision making is down to calculus, right? Like, so it's like they probably wake up every day with it trending a little bit, right in the middle, but trending a little, right or left, depending on the day's news stories about where the overall feelings of the other 31 owners are on that. But you have to wonder, at what point do they negotiate a sacrificial lamb? If we dump Snyder, does some of the other heat come off?
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, you can't do it too early, because then you haven't gotten rid of the problem. If you wait too late, then it's going to involve everybody. So it's a calculus, to use your word. This is the right exact moment. And to me, I don't think we're there yet. I think that the money part of it is really just an internal thing. They can be mad at him, but I don't know how much, unless there's federal fraud allegations, because this would be interstate commerce. If they can come up with a criminal violation out of that, that's different. But if it's just Dan Snyder cheating him out of money, I don't know if that solves the public perception problem necessarily. So I think really and truly they're waiting on the other shoe to drop. Dan Snyder grabbed the boob of a secretary. And here, by the way, some people have come to me and said, well, is it possible that the NFL could just send Dan Snyder home and let Tanya Snyder run the thing?
That's what they think they're doing right now.
Yeah, but remember, and I don't mean this to be disparaging to her, because I don't know her at all, never met her, but Tanya Snyder was a model who married a billionaire, okay? She might be a smart lady, I don't know, but she's certainly not business savvy. This is not somebody she's very charismatic. She's a model. She's far more charismatic than Dan. But I don't know if that's a solution to get a business that's off the tracks. Putting a model who married a billionaire in charge might not necessarily be the best way to go. And that's certainly not the way to clear the decks. The way to clear the decks is to just sell the team. So I don't think the Tanya Snyder compromise is one that will do anything.
It has to be coupled. So I think about this often. So there's a look into my brain. I think it has to be coupled with a divorce. I think, and that's
a Dan Snyder, Tanya Snyder divorce.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
I think, you do mean that. Oh, okay.
Yeah. I think, I think it only works in the lowest thing that could clear the decks, I think, is a divorce plus her sole ownership. Maybe some of the kids retain percentages or something, which is it's a little dubious. But if there's a divorce there, if there's a legal divorce and some definition of the, how that asset is dealt with, which is this is still fantasy land. But I think then you could start to see the, that, and, maybe if he knows his kids are maybe that helps get him out. But yeah, I didn't. It's not going to happen, and it would have to have a divorce. I think we're living under what it's like when the NFL tries to blow smoke up our behind that. Yeah. That it's Tanya's show.
And by the way, what I would respond to you in the divorce question is I would say that there's 100% chance that there is a pre or post nuptial agreement regarding Dan Snyder's assets. So there's already probably an agreed upon solution to the divorce problem. And usually those see, I think how ownership is, how the stocks is. Don't quote me on the percentages, but Dan Snyder owns a majority in his own name, and then like mom and a sister, I think it is, own the remaining part. And Tanya may have some sort of interest in it, but I don't know if Tanya actually owns any shares. And even if she does, Dan is the majority owner for sure. And so the idea here would be the team's worth, say, 4 billion roughly. And so,
Conservatively.
yeah. And so, if Dan or Tanya are going to buy each other, if Tanya buys Dan out, then you're talking she's got to come up with, $2.5 billion maybe, roughly. That's a ton of debt, And if Dan has to buy Tanya out, it's a lot less. So it's not just as easy as snappy fingers, divorce court. You get this, you
No.
get that. It's very complicated and it's financially challenging.
I just think it's the only way that everything's fine. Tanya owns the team even begins to work.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Now
he's got to be gone,
Yeah. We talked about, these kind of, what's the knockout blow for Snyder? But the NFL is actually dealing with two owners on wobbly knees. And I'd argue right now, today, that Ross in Miami is much closer to the knockout blow than Snyder, ultimately.
So Brian Flores, this is tied to Stephen Ross, who's the owner of the Miami Dolphins. Buried in the Flores lawsuit was an allegation that Ross ordered the team to lose, which is a major problem for the NFL. Well, Ross has upped the ante in here, claimed that Flores, when this happened, took notes, passed memos out to some of the other coaches and whatnot, and he's added all these things to his complaint. Now that doesn't have anything to do with the racial discrimination at all, and they've turned it into a whole nother level of complaint. There's it's something called the Florida Private Whistleblower Statute. I've not read it. I didn't have time this week for reasons Chris knows about. But he's alleged violations of that, and then it's violations of something called the Sports Bribery Act, which I again didn't have time to look into. So this is a fundamental integrity of the game thing. And so you're right in saying that this is a way bigger problem, because if you can't trust the integrity of the game, there's no point in watching the sport at all. And so that is a serious problem. I tell you what, to be perfectly honest, I think Stephen Ross might get gone way faster than Dan Snyder.
I totally agree. I think the path is much clearer. And it is pretty amazing to think that 2 of the 32 are on unenviable positions, to say it politely.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny because, we went over the Ross discrimination complaints, I don't know, a month ago? I can't remember. It's been a long week. But his complaints are kind of BS. I'm not saying that he wasn't discriminated against. I'm saying the way the petition was written was junk, basically junk. And the way he framed the class was junk. And he didn't even define the class right. It was not a lawsuit designed to go to trial. But this part is much more likely to have legs in court than all the other stuff, which is what started the process. I think it's a bit ironic, and there's a couple, he's added a couple more defendants, a couple more teams and stuff. So we'll have to see what happens. But yeah, I think, the mafia dawn may come for Stephen Ross much faster. And then basically what happens is the NFL, before I get to solution, so every NFL contract has a arbitration clause in it. The NFL has a massive arbitration program. The decks are obviously stacked in favor of the NFL. The NFL is almost assuredly going to try to move this into arbitration. Almost assuredly. It's how you do that is you file a motion in court that says, "Hey, court, this is covered by arbitration. You need to dismiss this lawsuit and send it to private arbitration," which the NFL has already set up. And if they do that, then none of this is going to be public. It'll all be private. But if the court chooses to keep it in court, why would they do that? Well, they would say the allegations are beyond the scope of what the arbitration clause covers, right? If they do that, then all of it will be public record because it's in court, and that causes a much bigger problem for the NFL. The NFL could deal with almost anything in arbitration. You pay him some confidential amount of money, he goes away. You slap Stephen Ross in the wiener, and he is quiet. All that's fine. If it's public, that's when I think you start cutting the legs out from people.
There are a lot of interesting things in this amended suit, or amended whatever it's called. I'm not a lawyer. Lawsuit that do up the ante on a few things. Obviously, the Ross stuff, and I think they're starting to make a better connection between the cause of the lawsuit and Ross. If you make a claim that if he's telling me every day that I'm being paid to lose, then how is this an environment where I'm supposed to succeed? And if black coaches have a hook that's half the time of a white coach, and I'm being told to, paid to lose or offered money to lose, then how's that? So they've made that connection. They're starting to make, and I agree. I don't know. It doesn't necessarily. I think arbitration might even be fine for that lawsuit on even the plaintiff side, eventually, especially if it's coupled with changing policies at the NFL, et cetera, et cetera. It's now Steve Wilks, Ray Horton. That means 2 of the 3 are still currently employed as NFL coaches, which is interesting, which also makes it might be, and the fact that Flores got hired. He's not a head coach, but he got hired. And, Tomlin might have done the NFL a real favor there, by the way. Then that's going to have others maybe be more willing to speak up, because 2 of the 3 are currently employed in their profession. So there isn't as much retribution as maybe some people expected. But the other interesting thing I think that comes through Wilks is Mike McCarthy, the guy that was the Tennessee head coach. Have you read this?
No, go ahead.
So in the Wilks part of the amendment, they pull a McCarthy thing from a podcast where he basically admits, talking about Wilks, who was coming in behind him on a coaching hire interview, that Tennessee told him, we're just going to do the Rooney Rule, sit tight. And McCarthy talks pretty detailed about how it's one of the most shameful things he's done in his career, and how could he look his kids and his players in the face.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's now, again, a better thing through arbitration might even be the plaintiff's goal. Half of this is the court of public opinion, this sort of soft mandate change. But that was a pretty damning piece of evidence there, that in the Wilks filing, or part of that filing.
Yeah, I've always strongly disagreed with the Rooney Rule, not because I don't think there needs to be equality. Obviously, we do need equality. And by the way, I think I said they added defendants before I meant plaintiffs.
Yeah.
So I just misspoke. But here's the problem with the Rooney Rule, in my view. If all you're doing is saying you have to interview people of a certain race, number one, I disagree with that as a fundamental premise, and I think everybody ought to be treated without regard to race. But if you're just saying you have to interview people, that doesn't mean you have to hire them. And so you have Steve Wilks' situation where it's a fraud, basically. The interview is pointless, and you're going to do it anyway. And so I'm looking my kids in the eye thing is like, hey, kids, I'm going to an interview. I know it's a setup. I know they're only interviewing me because I'm black or Hispanic or whatever I am. In case he's black. But it's not a real interview, and it's a sham. And so I think the Rooney Rules almost had the opposite of the intended effect. Now, simultaneously, I very, very strongly disagree with racial quotas. The NFL has instituted a racial quota. We didn't mention this. The NFL has instituted a racial quota wherein I'm going to get it a bit wrong, but I think it's every team has to have a minority or female assistant coach, I think is what the rule is.
I think it might be one on each staff, defense.
Okay. Something like that. And I very strongly disagree with that, because now, what happens? What kind of credibility does that coach have? And why should skin color matter? The true answer to this, of course, is to make sure you have owners who respect everybody and hire without regard to race. And you hire as a result of qualifications. And frankly, if you have to have a woman on every staff or whatever, how many women are qualified to coach in the NFL? I'm sorry to say, but there's not a ton of females who play football. There's a handful, But you can't enforce that down somebody's throat.
I think isn't it there that I think it's more
it's
that
a woman or
woman
a
can
racial minority.
can satisfy that. So it's not a requirement that they
Yeah, you're
exist.
right, but
They
it's
just
like,
check a box.
yeah, I mean, but how many women can fit in that box?
Yeah, but I mean, you could make the case that you don't have to have any of them. So it's not like a
Yeah,
supply and demand issue.
yeah. But that's the way I feel about it, and yeah, I think it is a sham. I think the Rooney Rule honestly needs to go.
Well, I think that's definitely going to be it. Well, and to my point, I think that's one of the reasons why I would say the now 3 coaches, and I would guess there'll be more. That they don't agree with. They think the Rooney Rule has not been effective. They may not necessarily agree with how it got there, but they would. I think most people agree it has not got the desired outcomes on all fronts. So
Yeah, well,
I think it's under attack.
these teams have a particular coach in mind, and they'll line up, do one sham minority interview to satisfy the rule, and that's pointless.
Yeah, but we also talk about Mike McCarthy or Mike McCartney, one of them. There's too many. See, there's too many. There's too many of them. I can't tell them apart. These white coaches. I mean, you start to break down just the whether I don't care about this as evidence, but you look at what happened to Steve Wilkes and Cardinals, and I think what Flores is claiming that, especially through Ross, is like, hey, you're going to lose. Is these are hires that were always intended to be sacrificial lambs, right? When you're one and done, like Wilkes, when your quarterbacks are Rosen and some other shrub, how many coaches get one season? Not many. Most
Not
get
many.
at least 2.
Yeah.
And even that, usually 3. So the
I'm not even
coming a
saying
little faster.
I'm not even saying Brian Flores is wrong about what he's saying. All my point was about his lawsuit was that it was written poorly and they framed it improperly. Is the idea that the NFL has discriminated against African Americans? Is that such a novel idea? No. Especially look at the treatment of quarterbacks over the decades. They very clearly discriminated against quarterbacks. They very clearly discriminated against African American coaches. For whatever reason. So I think Flores' point has merit. I just think the way he went about it was poor.
And I think what they did was they rushed the lawsuit being pretty skeletal, and now they're just hanging things on it. And I think this week with these, I think there was actually some meat put on the bones this week. Whether it tips it, I think it was a win for that lawsuit this week. And on what's interesting about it, it's on 2 fronts, really, because we're talking about the racial discrimination and the raw stuff. And I do think there's a link, but really they have more power. Now they've been sort of unleashed. They're really 2 beasts in the world for the NFL.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. And the racial discrimination stuff isn't really news, but the raw stuff is news. And that, like I said, harms the integrity of what the NFL has always called the shield. It harms the integrity of the game in the eyes of the public. The NBA had this problem. With the allegation, who was the name of the guy's escape? The referee who was taking money.
Oh, Donaghy.
Yeah, him. Donaghy fundamentally altered the integrity of the NFL game, but they were able to limit the damage to just him, so the NBA got out of it. Here, this is an owner doing this. I think it's serious. I think it's far more serious than the racial discrimination complaint. Far bigger problem.
And that Jay Gruden cache, right? The Bruce Allen email cache.
What is in the cache of emails?
It has direct implications on every single thing we talked about in the last 35 minutes. So yes, the shield is dented. But we like positive news as well. So March Madness is back. March Madness had, I think, one of its best ratings years in like 20 years or something like that. I mean, I don't have all the details right in front of me. I can go find them, but they are very happy at the NCAA around the performance of March Madness this TV season.
Yeah. So the ratings are 18.5 million viewers for the championship game. The interesting part was all of this is on TBS. This is a really interesting part because usually anything on cable gets lower ratings than anything on network TV. That's what and there's multiple aspects of the story. We'll get to it, but what really stuck out in my head more than anything was that they did not need CBS to drive massive ratings. If you go back even a few years, that's impossible to do. And that's a reason why no cable outlet was able to bid on these things in the past, for the most part, up until in the past several years, because it just gets trounced by all things network. Why? Because everybody has network TV. Not everybody has a way to watch cable channels. Now, kind of everybody does. And yes, there's people who are financially, in bad straits who don't. I'm talking about the middle class upwards. Everybody has a way to watch almost anything now, streaming, whatever the case may be. And so you can put something like the title game of March Madness on TBS, and it doesn't matter at all. That's what stuck out in my head.
Yeah, and then the story about why it was on TBS is fascinating. And basically, if you don't know, and I didn't really know, so this is no condemnation, is that TBS and CBS actually trade the broadcast rights for the Final Four and the national championship game. There's a whole rainbow coalition of networks that do, when they start at 68. But when it gets down to the Final Four and the championship game, they basically just tag you're it, year after year. And this has been going on, I think, since like 2016 or something like that. And it's going to go on. Like next year, you can bank it. You can watch it on CBS. So next year is CBS's year.
I don't think TBS is. I might be wrong about this, but I don't recall TBS having the championship game in the past.
No, they have. This has been going on here. I can look it up in a minute, but it had. This is. So they did it 2 years ago for sure, and I just have to see how far back that cycle goes.
Okay, yeah. While you're doing that, because I was most nervous about. I love the One Shining Moment video every year. That's my favorite part about this. And TBS put some little clip of some very, very bizarre sitcom that they had. And I thought, oh no, they're not doing, TBS must not have the rights to One Shining Moment. But it turns out they were just plugging this strange, weird show for 10 minutes and they came back, thankfully. But I wasn't aware that I don't even remember TBS had it.
So 2014 was actually the first time that the Final Four and the championship game was on TBS, on cable. Okay. So cable at all, TBS. And so that from 2014 and it goes through 2024. So the deal was 10-year deal. So it was 2014 to 2024. And in that time, in that 10-year block, it trades off. So TBS gets 5, CBS gets 5. But so which I'd never paid attention to that until this year.
And it looks like, oh, by the way, if you want to read about this, we have a site, something called Sports Media Watch. The Final Four
which may not exist anymore.
Maybe not. Yeah, because this is the article that we found was from 8 years ago that Chris found, called "The Final Four airs on TBS, not CBS this year," and that's just the beginning by Paulson. That's what I'm looking at currently, and so so it says, 2024. It will be on cable again. So so look for it. But I just think it sort of is a sign of the times about where we are in entertainment acquisition. Really, that 18.5 million people can watch something on cable. Again, you go back a decade, that's just unheard of. It's unheard of. And here we are.
No, I totally agree.
And it wasn't even that interesting of a Final Four, by the way.
I don't know about that. Duke UNC's the biggest. Huge.
Well, granted, but there was the Cinderella was gone. I don't
know. There's no narrative like Coach K's final game, Duke UNC. I mean, the numbers for that game are better than the national championship game.
Yeah, they were. Maybe I just my anti-big school bias, I guess. To me, it was less. I would have rather seen St. Peter's. That would have been more interesting to me. But certainly Duke, Coach K's final game. Yeah, obviously massive draw.
Yeah, I mean, right. You can't. That's me search you're doing there, Steve. Like at a scale, that's a very interesting game. So I'll tell you my other Las Vegas story was I was in Vegas and I was like getting husband/dad of the week at least for taking my daughter, but then also hanging out with my daughter while my wife actually worked. She was there to work. So Saturday night, the clouds open Saturday afternoon, really, and they were going to go get their hair blown out or some BS. And so I was like, well, I'm going to go walk down to MGM sports book and watch this sort of like legendary game, because everyone knew it was going to be that, and lay some money. Now I was by myself, so that's kind of a drag, and sit in a room with 90 TVs and have bet slips in my pocket. So I laid 3 bets. I said I took the over 153.5. I took Duke over at halftime 2.5, and I took UNC to cover the 4.5. Now I'm UNC over Duke all day, just public school over private school, A. And then B, Hubert Davis, their head coach, was a senior when I was a sophomore in high school. We went to high school together. He's a couple years older than me, but I watched him play. I followed his career to UNC. He got to the Final Four there. I watched in heartbreak as who was the Knicks coach, as Van Gundy would not pull John Starks in the final Game 7 for Patrick Ewing against the Houston Rockets. And as soon as he did, when it was too late, Hubert hit a 3 right away. So I've rooted for Hubert Davis my whole life. So I was all in emotionally on Hubert Davis. So I had to have my emotional bet. Well, Steve, I'm here to tell you I hit all 3 bets.
Oh,
I was very excited. And the one that was super exciting was that my 2.5 Duke at halftime, that I was like, I was already in the process of ripping that ticket up when the Duke guard drove, hit the bucket, and got an and one, which gives me the half point right there. So as long as he hits the free throw, I hit my bet. Now, we talked about being low rollers. So I did not, I think I won. I made all 3 bets. I think my grand total of winning was $89 or something.
Oh, very low. So I was about to say, did the wife know you hit all these? But $89, yeah. Probably got flushed right back into the casino one way or the other.
It did. But I still love being right.
Hey, that's a great story, man. I love it. It's see, the NCAA tournament really doesn't have to be 68 teams. Isn't it 68 now? I think it's 68. Yeah. They could have 20 and it would be fine, because St. Peter's shouldn't win the tournament, or pick your poison. Every year there's a Cinderella. Oh, that was a pretty big one. But it exists in this format solely as an entertainment product. You don't need all this to determine who's the best team in the country. But it's so much money involved. Don't forget, we had a story, last year, year and a half ago maybe, about the impact of the lack of the tournament in the coronavirus year on the funding of other college athletic programs around the country. And it's a massive impact, because this tournament takes in multiple billions in just a month. And all of that money gets flushed directly down to other schools. So without this massive operation, there's a serious problem. And that's what we saw 2 years ago, or 2 seasons ago, about it. So it's at this point, I think the tournament's more of an entertainment product. I mean, solely an entertainment product more than it is a true tournament. It's a tournament. Probably. I said that badly, but I mean, it's a tournament, but then a necessary tournament.
I think it's a buffet, right? Like, I still think they probably it still is a system that probably gives you a legitimate national champion, right? Like,
I'm not saying it's not legitimate. I'm saying they didn't need to go through all this. That's what I'm saying.
No, right. That's what I'm saying. That's what it's a buffet, right? It's gluttony, when you talk about 68 teams. And yes, it's of course driven by money, and it's not just money in the most obvious ways that Steve just talked about in terms of like direct revenue. It's also like, think of how many alumni groups, think of how many, it's like there's very few things where people feel like they can compete or even just get to the competition. Maybe that's a better way to say it, than there is, for schools all the way down the line. And so, like, this is a great way to juice alumni. It's a great way to do a lot of things on these small campuses, just the fact that they get there. And then if they do go on a run, but even the fact that they can get there drives a lot of decision making in athletic departments, and a big thing in alumni outreach. I mean, you can say to St. Mary's, you can say to St. Bonaventures, you can say to all kinds of in your Colgates and stuff like that you have a chance to be in the big competition. That's that's a huge chip on so many levels that in those schools, have to play.
Well, sure. And look at the big Cinderella this year with St. Peter's. I'd honestly never heard of St. Peter's.
Yeah, me neither. And it's one state away from me.
But it turns out they had some charismatic guys. On the team, they had the guy that looked like a 70s porn star, was kind of the leader of the team. I think it's a great way for St. Peter's and those players to get a bit of attention to, like you said, recruiting, probably some advertising money, sponsors here and there. It is a great way to, generally speaking, increase visibility, because listen, I mean, this year is going to be up to date the biggest moment in St. Peter's basketball history. Almost assuredly, they got to the Elite Eight, and that is something they can go to every recruit, all the local sponsors. It's in New Jersey, right? Isn't that where St. Peter's is? The local New Jersey sponsors. Now that everybody knows who they are. So yeah, it's certainly, I think, done wonders. And like the schools you mentioned, who's heard of St. Bonaventure's? Never. Davison College, I was aware of. I mean, but that's a very small name. They're usually in it. I don't think they were this year. But there's a number of schools like that have developed a reputation over the years as being basketball programs that they otherwise wouldn't. Nobody would have heard of them. So that's definitely a benefit, I think.
Yeah. And with the financial engine back to revving because it's been a tough couple of years, on March Madness. I mean, Don't forget, March Madness got wiped out days before it was supposed to start at the very beginning of the pandemic. I mean, it's sort of like, body one in a way. So like it's sort of, it's been beat up, but with the engine seeming to be revving again, that's got to be just great news for the NCAA. And I think great news for, we can be cynical and it's all about the money, but I think they had a good tournament, and it's good. It's good to have a couple wins every once in a while. It is thing that a lot of people like. It's one of those kind of, maybe only to the Super Bowl, quite frankly, that sort of transcends culturally, in terms of a sports type of thing. You maybe when Tiger's in a golf tournament, which it's going to be this weekend. You'll have already happened by the time you listen to this, but that's going to be something like how many people were at his practice round the other day or something. So there are very few things in sports ultimately that break through, and I think the tournament is one of them.
To be honest, I mean, yes, the Super Bowl is definitely number one, but ultimately it's a 2-week thing, and it's really a 1-week cycle. And yes, everybody pays attention to it. The March Madness tournament is a month.
So 5 weeks.
It drags in people who aren't sports fans at all. You do your office, pools with it. People are talking about it as attention for an entire month. I would almost say, Chris, that March Madness might be more important than the Super Bowl to kind of the overall general sports business calculus a little bit, just because it's so long, whereas the Super Bowl is a contained thing. And Tiger, yeah, granted, when Tiger's in contention on a Sunday, that's the biggest thing in America. Tiger Woods is, I think, one of the, 2 or 3 or 4 most important athletes of the past generation. He single-handedly rescued golf from obscurity. Single-handedly, pretty much. There was the old crowd that followed Jack Nicklaus and Tom Watson and all that. Tiger Woods alone totally changed it. And when the tournament, if you notice the ratings in the pool, the pot and the attention these tournaments get when he's not in it, it's a dramatic change. So what we're recording this on Saturday morning, for example. So Tiger made the cut at the Masters. We don't know what's going to happen. Yeah, he did make the cut. So if he's in contention on Sunday, Tiger in contention on Sunday at the Masters, everybody will be watching. And if he's out of it,
They'll still sneak his shots in.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. But if he's not there at all, like last year, he wasn't there at all because this leg thing. And notice the ratings were challenging. Part of it was, the coronavirus scheduling stuff, but part of it was when Tiger's not there, most people don't care. And so I think that those 3 things, as you said, but I'd almost maybe put March Madness number 1.
Yeah, I think so. And it had been teetering. And I think even a little bit pre-COVID had been teetering a little bit in general. But I think this is like they definitely had their one shining moment, so to speak. Now, Steve, before I think I know the answer to this, but before we close out the show, and speaking of basketball players with porn mustaches, have you watched Winning Time?
No.
Oh my God, Steve, this is up your alley. How have you not watched this?
Because I'm mad at the Los Angeles Lakers. That's why.
Yes, but are you mad at the 1979-80 Los Angeles
No, it's
Lakers?
the Magic Johnson's always been one of my heroes.
Then you have to watch it. This is it's a show about Magic Johnson.
I haven't been able to bring myself to do it yet. Everybody's told me it's great.
It's amazing, A. And B, I think it will at least be a celebration of the things that you used to like about the Lakers. It even is like you can even take I hate the Lakers now because that was so great view of the show.
You're one of many who've told me I need to watch the show. I will get around to it. Like the other day, on the day that the Lakers were eliminated from the play, I haven't watched any NBA in 2 years, but I saw like the highlight on SportsCenter. You saw that scumbag LeBron James walking away 20 minutes before the game was over because he wasn't playing, and Magic Johnson, who's a real man, would never have done that. LeBron James, who's a fake girly man. It's just I just think the NBA he's ruined the NBA to me completely. So yes, maybe this would be a celebration of what was a real era of NBA and Laker basketball. Maybe yes. I haven't done it yet. I don't know what to tell you.
It will be only additive to your narrative that you just espoused.
Yeah. Honestly, I mean, we didn't plan on talking about this, but I think LeBron James has truly ruined the NBA. I really do, for a number of reasons. Number one, he's a selfish me first player. He's taken control of every team he's had. Look at what he's responsible for the Lakers roster this year. What did he do? He's not a coach. He's not a GM. He brought a bunch of old players that don't fit well together, and surprise, surprise, they don't win. Teams in the past didn't do that. Even Magic Johnson didn't do that. Magic Johnson was a very headstrong personality too. He ran Paul West's head off, in 1979. But Jerry West and Pat Riley and Dr. Jerry Buss are the ones who built those teams, not the players. And LeBron James has ushered in an era of NBA basketball in which the players rule, and that has consequences. And number two, why I really hate LeBron is he thinks because he's in the public eye and he's very, very wealthy, he's smarter than the rest of us. And he has no qualms about spouting off about all kinds of stuff. He has no idea what he's talking about because he's an ignorant basketball player. And I just can't take it anymore. I cannot take him another moment. So I'm just done. He's caused me to run away from, more than anybody else, he's caused me to run away from the NBA.
Well,
Chris is
all of that is an endorsement for why you should watch the show.
I know. I should watch it. But it's like, it's been tough. But I will tell you what, I will watch it. I'll have a report in 2 weeks over however much of that I get through.
All right, because if you want to know about the intermachinations of Jerry West, Paul Westhead, Jerry Buss, the first coach in '79, the guy who really kind of came up with the Jack McDowell, I think, and there is an insane portrayal of Jack Kent Cooke that is just super, super interesting.
Oh, really? Well, yeah. I had to get through season 6. The other thing is I had to get through season 5 of Better Call Saul.
To be ready for the new season? Yeah,
because I watched 1 through 4, but I didn't watch any of the show when it was on originally, so I had to catch up with it. And unfortunately, up until last week, only seasons 1 through 4 were available streaming on streaming services. So I had to, some Vice, I think, some channel had a marathon of season 5. I had to record all that and watch it. So that's it. My TV experience was taken up with Better Call Saul because it's coming back in a week, I think it is. Yeah. That show, I mean, tell you, nothing to do with sports. Better Call Saul is one of the best shows ever produced on television, I think.
I love it. I'm sure you love that season where it's just Doc review.
Yeah, believe me, I've done it. Okay, I've done Doc review sucks. It's horrible. It's like just so I understand how Kim Wexler, what she was going through, because I have done Doc review. It's terrible.
I do. I'm very excited about its return. But All right. Well, I'm waiting on. And it is a fascinating show. But anyway, the guy who plays Jack, you'll like this. Last thing, the guy who plays Jack Kent Cooke is not a kid anymore, but the kid who was the lead caddy in Caddyshack. You know, the one that Chevy Chase takes under his wing.
Oh, really? That's
Yeah.
him, huh?
Yeah. So it's him playing Jack. It's him playing Jack Kent Cooke as a just down the center bad guy, racist rich guy.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, did they make it known that he became the owner of the Washington Redskins later?
Well, he actually owned them at the same time. So at that time, he actually owned both.
Oh, did he really? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, he was, and so they don't. I think they might mention it once. They don't like hide from that, and they don't hide from like the fact that he's going through some ginormous divorce, the most expensive divorce in history at the time, and stuff like that. So, but it seems like he's not a kind of a, we think of him as a quirky character, John Kent Cooke, whatever. But they make him very straight laced and just sort of buttoned up, you know, kind of rich asshole. But then I was listening to Rick Doc Walker talk, and they were like, "This isn't the Jack Kent Cooke we know." And what did you? And Rick Doc Walker goes, "That pretty much lines up with everything I ever saw or heard."
Really? Yeah, that's man. And I know Doc. Wow, he's been on our show multiple times, and he's he's a huge talker, but he's also just blunt, very blunt and honest. That is not an act. He's very blunt and honest. And so if Doc says that's what he saw, I take his word for it because I know Doc, and that's interesting.
So even all the like cool early 80s Lakers basketball, Jerry Buss, a lot of sports business stuff into it, actually. Then you get this in episode 1, I think, and that's pretty much it, because that's the trade-off of ownership, basically. But you get basically a whole episode of Jack Kent Cooke.
Well, Jack Kent Cooke was the one who like famously put purple and gold balloons in the rafters in Game 7 in the Forum, and then the Celtics won.
That's in there.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Like I said, I will watch it, and I will have a report.
It's a big campy male soap opera. And the guy that got to play Magic looks like him. It's crazy. All right. Well, with that, I think we'll bring it to a close. We're watching more of these stories. I'm sure, the NFL just does not slow down. So I'm sure we'll be talking about the NFL in 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
All right. See you then.